What's up, guys? If you're not subscribed, please subscribe. Also, please smash that like button on the video and enjoy the show.
It was a red-eye flight, as was MH370. It was over water. It had left an area of air traffic control and was in between, over the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. You're outside of radar contact. They weren't expecting anything unusual to happen, like day after day after day. Imagine you spent 20 years sitting in your booth in the middle of the night.
Jeff Wise, welcome to the studio, sir.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
I'm excited to talk with you too, because you and I had a chance to talk on the phone for a long time, about a month ago after the podcast that came out in November, which you saw. Yeah. And I wanted to give people some context before we start, but for your chops, just so people know, you obviously have been an aviation reporter for years, all different kinds of publications. You have reported on the MH370 case as like an exclusive for the past, I mean, you do other reporting too, but as like the main focus over the past 10 years. You're currently doing a podcast on it as well. Right. What's the name of that podcast?
The podcast is called Deep Dive MH370.
Okay. Great name.
We'll
put that down in the description. But also, you know, when not to address the 500-pound elephant in the room. Obviously, when I did the last podcasts, there were 2 of them with Ashton. There was all kinds of drama online after that. That is not something I've ever had to be involved with. It's not something I enjoy being involved with. People obviously get very uptight about this case. But, you know, that aside, you were a guy, what I really appreciated about you, not only watching those podcasts, because I didn't know you when you did, but then also talking with me and having a great conversation, is that while I was very complimentary of your career in those podcasts and a lot of the work you've done on this case that we're going to get through today, I also threw some funny side rim shots about your theory on this case, and you were beautifully magnanimous about it, and that made me like you. Okay. So I want to be able to litigate some of that today. We'll get to what we get to with it, but what I really want to do is try to set, like, you did an amazing job of figuring out exactly what happened to where we lost, I guess, like, contact with the aircraft when this happened. And then obviously there are some theories that could go on beyond that. But you also did a great job of poking holes or issues into the aftermath over the next couple of years, which we will talk all about today. Right. So I'd like to start at the very beginning, that little monologue aside. Okay. When did you, when this disappearance happened, how quickly did you pick it up as a story? Was it within an hour or a day?
It took me a little while, actually. I had just filed a story. I was writing a lot for Popular Mechanics at the time, and I had spent a lot of, sometimes you like just pour yourself into a story, you get exhausted, you're just sick of it, you just want to take a break. And so at this exact moment where this happened, I did not want to deal with it. I did not want to. Airplane accidents happen. They're tragic. It's part of what I have been doing and what I was doing at the time, is to try to understand for the public what happened. People are fascinated by air travel. They're a little bit scared of it. When bad things happen, they want to know why. So for a couple of days, I was just like, it was sort of playing in the background. And then Slate reached out to me, and they were asking me if I could cover it. I said, all right, fine. I remember because I was actually sitting in my car, alternate side parking, when the text came through, or the email, I guess. And I was like, oh, I have to cover this story.
Next 10 years of your life.
The next 10 years. I mean, it's not the only thing I've been writing about, but I have, obsession is, I think, a fair word.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, it's completely unprecedented for a plane to never, I mean, I guess you have like Amelia Earhart back in the 1920s, but for a commercial jetliner to go down or whatever happened to it and never have any evidence recovered, we've never seen that before.
Well, evidence has been recovered, but you're correct, completely unlike any other case we've ever had. Planes disappear all the time. I mean, from Amelia Earhart onwards. There was a very famous case in 2009 when Air France 447 disappeared en route from Rio de Janeiro to Paris. And it took them 2 years to find the wreckage on the seabed. And there were some uncanny coincidences, I would say, between that case and MH370, which happened just a few years later.
Like what?
Well, so Air France 447 disappeared. It was a red-eye flight, as was MH370.
Mm-hmm.
It was over water. It had left an area of air traffic control and was in between, over the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. You're outside of radar contact. And so the expectation is that you say goodbye to the air traffic controller in South America, and then some hours later you say hello to the air traffic controller in Africa. And the plane just suffered some unfortunate sequence of events, and it crashed. And so it was several hours before anyone realized that it was missing. Well, where is this plane? Because there was a blip that was on the air traffic controller's screens that sort of was the marker where we assume this is where it is. And so they didn't realize that the system was just assuming that that's where it was. They were seeing the plane moving across the screen. Everything seemed to be in order. And so then when MH370 happened, it might be useful to your listeners and viewers to know that the plane took off on a red-eye flight from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing. 40 minutes into its flight, it was over the South China Sea. It had left the last waypoint in Malaysian air traffic control responsibility, a waypoint called Igari, and several seconds later, like several heartbeats later, it goes electronically dark. But it had just entered this area. As I said, Air France 447, several years earlier, had been in this in-between zone. And so that when it disappeared, nobody was looking at it. Nobody was paying attention to it. This Malaysian Airlines MH370 had just left, had said goodnight to Malaysian air traffic control, left the last waypoint. Officially, nobody was responsible for it.
How long, what's the longest period of time where no one's supposed to be responsible for it that it can be legally?
It was legally supposed to be like 3 minutes. Okay. Unlike Air France 447, which was like in this huge international, ocean. Malaysian Airlines was over a fairly small body of water, and it was the air traffic control areas directly abut. But there's a handover period. There's a certain amount of time you say goodbye, hello. But so the air traffic controllers in Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam were expecting this plane to come onto their screens, and it just didn't. And they were supposed to wait like 3 minutes, but it was the middle of the night. They weren't expecting anything unusual to happen, like day after day after day. Imagine you spent 20 years sitting in your booth in the middle of the night, and planes come through. Nothing unusual ever happens. And now this plane isn't there. And 3 minutes go by, and 4 minutes go by, and 5 minutes go by. It takes a little while for you to say, wait a minute, I better make a call. Yeah. So it took longer than people expected, but when you look at it in retrospect, it seems like a pretty slapdash effort to find out where this plane went.
Yeah, there was all kinds of confusion with the communication from the government. So I will butcher the names if I try it, but there were two main figures who would talk to the people. There was one. What were their official roles?
Well, the Prime Minister of Malaysia would get up and speak. This was like days later. This was in the sort of the aftermath. And when we in the Deep Dive MH370 podcast, what we try to do is talk about the timeline that happened in the flight, like we were just talking about being in between two air traffic control areas, and then also the timeline of the mystery unfolding. Okay. Like it took people days to realize that, wait a minute, you saw this on military radar? So yeah, it's a fairly complicated sequence of events, which is why my partner Andy Tarnoff and I decided we need to do like a whole. Yes. We're now 17 episodes in, and we're only like halfway through.
Yeah, it's really good.
So many. It's a detailed case, and Julian, the reason I'm grateful for you to have me on is because my mission is to try to talk about the case, but also to talk about how we talk about the case. Like, how do you grapple with a case that, as you say, is unprecedented? There's never been anything like this. We have to almost develop a new set of tools to take it apart.
Yeah.
Everything about it is different from anything we've ever seen before.
Yes. I also get really tempted when I'm talking about this topic to jump around because there's so many layers to it. So I'd like to try to do a good job of being organized today.
Right.
You've already laid out some of the story.
Right.
Obviously, some people watching this would have seen the podcasts in November, which are available on Spotify, episode 168 and 169 that I did with Ashton. But after the plane lost contact and we never heard from it again, would you mind just going through the timeline that happens over, say, maybe the next 24 hours or so?
Yeah.
As we know it. Thank you for watching the video, guys. If you haven't already subscribed, please smash that subscribe button and check out this clip's full podcast episode by clicking here or in the description below.